Good morning. Welcome to Tea, Coffee, and Torah, episode 28. I'm glad to have you with me this morning. We have some interesting material to cover, and I am so glad that for all of your participation. Thank you for your support, and thank you for the discussions that have come out of this, both online as well as privately. So I really do appreciate it. So last week, I did post another sheet. This one is quite a bit longer. It still ends up being 3 leaves, but it's quite a bit longer. So again, if you print this out, which I don't really suggest, but you may want to, because as we get into this, we're going to start comparing our different leaves to each other. So if you do have it printed out, it does help with the comparison, just because there is so much information. The other thing is, when you do print this out, print it in portrait as well as align it vertically. So anyways, we are still working in Jeremiah 32:21. And what we are seeing is the prophet's use of scholarship in ancient Israel. And what we're seeing is a couple things. Number one, we're seeing that scholars quoted from the predecessors, and they also quoted from a primary source. And the primary source that is always sought for justification or as a source of memory for the prophets is the written Torah. And they quote from this extensively. Now, we're going to look this morning at a specific phrase. In English, it's mighty hand, and it's the phrase, I will stretch out my hand. So this is repeated in Jeremiah 32:21. It says, with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm. And sometimes it's the word arm, sometimes it's the word hand. It's kind of interchangeable. So in Exodus 3:19 and 20, it says, I am sure that the king will not let you go. No, not by a mighty hand, and I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders. So this is really where this initial idea of a mighty and outstretched hand comes from. And we'll get back to that in a minute. In Exodus 6:1, it says, for with a strong hand, Pharaoh will not let them go, and with a strong hand, they shall drive them out of the land. Now, the words, everything that I am showing in this Excel sheet, everything is parallel. They are the exact same Hebrew words that appear every single time. So, you have the Hebrew word for strong, and you have the Hebrew word for hand, which of course is yod. So these terms occur in the same order and in the same phraseology. Again, in Exodus 13:9 and 10, regarding the Feast of Unleavened. You know, last time we saw that the justification for equal weights and measures in Leviticus, it was justified because Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt. They should observe the equal weights and measures because he brought them up, he delivered them, and he made a covenant with them. Well, we find the same type of justification, the same reasoning here in Exodus 13 verses 9 and 10 regarding the Feast of Unleavened. And it shall be for a sign unto you upon your hand and for a memorial between your eyes, that Yahweh's law may be in your mouth. And with a strong hand has Yahweh brought you up out of the land of Egypt. You shall therefore keep his ordinance in his season. We're going to come back to this one in a minute because there's a twist and a play on ideology that is used in this text. So we'll come back to that in a minute. Exodus 32 verse 11. Let's see. And Moses besought Yahweh his God and said, Yahweh, why does your wrath wax hot against your people, which you have brought forth out of the land of Egypt? There's that phrase that we saw last time. And with great power and with a mighty hand. So here, it's not the exact same phraseology. And I do have the first string of this in orange with the attachment and the adjunction in kind of a teal color. So where where it is exact, I have it in blue. Actually, I see in Exodus 6:1. I missed that one. That second one should have been in blue. I'll correct that and re-upload it. Then in Exodus, let's see. In Numbers 20:20, we have again this ideology of Yahweh bringing Israel out with a strong hand. It says, and he said, you shall not go through. And Edom came out against him, and with much people, and with a strong hand. So here, Edom's coming out is specifically in reference to coming out for war, coming out for battle. You know, they come out with a strong hand. It's when one group is stronger than the other, and they have a victory. It's referred to as a strong hand. And Yahweh's deliverance of Israel out of Egypt is referred to something that Yahweh did with a strong and mighty hand. And we're going to get into that ideology just a little bit more. We're going to unpack that because, you know, the question is, what does this refer to? And I'm specifically speaking, regarding to how academic scholarship approaches these terms and these ideas. They don't really assume anything outside the text. So when we're looking at textual studies, we do have to stick within the text, even though there may be archaeology that obviously supports a lot of the biblical positions. Right now, we're really looking at the text. In Deuteronomy 3:24, it says, O Yahweh God, you have begun to show your servants your greatness, and by your mighty hand, for what God is there in heaven and earth that can do all according to your works and according to your might. So this here has the idea that Yahweh's works and his might separates him. It separates him from mortals. It separates him from other deities, because he is able to do something that other deities are not. Namely, he's able to show the power of his hand to deliver Israel. Now, let's go. Actually, we're going to continue this row, and then we'll go back to Exodus 3:19 for something in just a minute. Leviticus 22 verses 32 and 32 and 33. I'm just making sure that I got this one right. For some reason, I had trouble with my computer saving a few things this morning. Okay, I'm not really seeing on that one. I'm not seeing the mighty hand, on that one. So I'm going to have to go look at my document on that, and I'll update it later. So let's go over to Deuteronomy 4:34, which is the closest to the text that Jeremiah is quoting from. In Deuteronomy 4:34, it says, Or has God assuaged to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, and by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, by great terrors, according to all that Yahweh your God has done for you and your eyes in the land of Egypt. So again, we find this idea of this mighty hand and this outstretched arm. And if you'll notice, there's a natural development in the text where in the very beginning, there is recording something that occurred. You know, in Exodus 3:19 and 20, he says, Pharaoh won't let you go by a mighty hand. And then that response to that mighty hand is that Yahweh will outstretch his hand. And then in Exodus 6:1, it's again this idea that Pharaoh has a strong hand and Yahweh is countering it with a strong hand. But then this becomes a formula by the time we reach Deuteronomy. So this shows that Deuteronomy is actually drawing from an earlier text. It is drawing from previous works of the scribes that worked under Moses. So the ideas are developing. You can see that you're taking a story that the scribes would have, or a history, an account that the scribes would have recorded under Moses. And then by the time we get to Deuteronomy, which is 40 years after the Exodus, or maybe 38 years after the Exodus, it becomes something that is a formal statement that always refers to the Exodus. Now, of years ago, I'm not going to say how many years ago because it was quite a few. I was on an ancient Near Eastern forum out of the University of Chicago. They had a really, really good forum where you had the top scholars in the field. They were discussing ideas. And this one thread of, and again, these were top academic scholars, they were discussing the Exodus, and they were discussing the Bible's claims to all of these miracles in Egypt. And everybody on that forum, these scholars, were really humanizing God. They pretty much rejected any idea of miracles, any idea of anything out of the ordinary that we would see in our natural world today. And this debate went on for probably, oh my goodness, there were probably 50, 60 posts to this one thread. And finally, you had this older scholar who got on. And he said, isn't the very definition of a divine being somebody who can perform a work, somebody who can do something that humans can't? And he pointed out how scholars, at least modern scholarship, humanizes God. We seek to make God in our likeness and in our image, confined to the same physical limitations that you and I as physical human beings are confined to. Where if God is a being that created us, that created the world, obviously he has some power outside of us. And when it comes to the plagues and the signs and wonders, which is what is consistently referred to throughout the Exodus story, if he is capable of doing signs and wonders, then that meets the definition of a deity, because a deity is a being that can do something that humans cannot. He has greater knowledge as to how to execute and bring these things to pass. So as we come in to Deuteronomy, if you'll look at the second line of the spreadsheet, in Deuteronomy 5:15, it says, "And remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and that Yahweh your God brought you out from there through a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yahweh your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." So here again, so far we've seen the Yahweh's delivering Israel out of Egypt. The fact that Yahweh did that, the fact that he married them in the wilderness, is the justification and the reason that he gives for keeping just balances, just weights, for keeping the Feast of Unleavened. And now we're seeing as also the justification for observing the Sabbath day. Yahweh did these things for you on your part to show that you're part of this covenant relationship. You are going to obey, and these are the things that you are going to obey. And if you notice, these things are not egregious. Yahweh in his love wants us to take a day off of work. He doesn't want us to be slaves. I will say that I have many friends who work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They don't take, other than maybe their vacation time, their life is the life of basically a slave, because they are always working, and they never get any downtime. They never get that intermission and that day of rest, where I know for me, every Friday I am just like, looking forward to those hours to where the Sabbath begins, that I don't have to clean the house. I don't have to go research this or go do something on my book or meet a deadline. I don't have to do the things that I normally do during the week, because I get to breathe. I get to rejuvenate, relax for the next week. And that is something that Yahweh says we do. It's how we show our love, our affection for him, because he brought us out of the land of Egypt. Now, in Deuteronomy 6:21 through 23, it states, "And when you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's bondsmen in Egypt, and Yahweh brought us out of Egypt," remember this is out of Egypt, the same as we saw before, "with a mighty hand. And Yahweh showed signs and wonders, great and evil, upon Egypt and upon Pharaoh and upon all his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in to give us the land which he showed to our fathers." Now, in this one, we don't have the formal two-part phrase where, the first part is a mighty hand and then the second is an outstretched arm. Rather, it truncates this into just the first stanza. In Deuteronomy 7, verses 7 and 8, it says, "Yahweh did not choose to set his love upon you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all people. but because Yahweh loved you and because he would keep the oath which he has sworn to your fathers, and has redeemed, and Yahweh has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen from Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now, this takes a different route. With this mighty and outstretched arm, it really replaces it with this redeeming you out of the house of bondage. But notice the concept there is the same, because when we read that Yahweh delivered Israel with an outstretched arm, what is he referring to? He's referring to redeeming them from the house of bondage. So the context is the same. The concept is the same. The words may be different, but it is talking about the same thing, and it's still the same stitch, where you have this A-B formula that is consistently used throughout the Torah. And we're going to see too, it's actually used in Israel's history books as well as by Israel's prophets, because that's going to be the next leg of our study, is seeing how these phrases continue to be cited as scholarship by Psalms as well as later prophets. Turn to Deuteronomy 7. We're going to go down a few verses later to verses 18 and 19. It says, "You shall not be afraid of them, but shall well remember what Yahweh your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, and the great trials which your eyes saw, and the signs and the wonders, and the mighty hand and the outstretched arm, whereby Yahweh your God brought you out of the land, and to all people whom you are afraid." My text there is a little truncated. But notice here, Deuteronomy 7, 18 and 19 is almost a quote of Deuteronomy 6, 21 and 23. But it's also a quote of Exodus 3, 19 and 20. So what we see is that whatever primary sources these scholars were working from, they were all working from the same primary sources. Now, again, I think that, number one, to view these texts as all written by the hand of Moses is a gross error, a gross assumption. I think a more accurate description would be referring to the scribes who worked under Moses and worked under Moses's authority. So in other words, an event would happen, or maybe, Moses says, write a memorial. You may have 2-3 scribes writing the same account, putting it into their own words, which is why we see some, different wording. Or maybe they record different aspects of the same event. But then you find that as time progresses, here they've had 40 years to write about their history. It becomes something where the deliverance out of Egypt becomes very formalized for scholarship and is referred to in specific ways. So that when the scribe is referring to miracles in Egypt, it has a specific formula, so that way everybody knows what is being referred to. So we just have 2 more texts here. Deuteronomy 26, verses 8 and 9. "And Yahweh brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and with great terror and signs and wonders. And he has brought us to this place and given us this land, even a land that flows with milk and honey." So this almost sounds like they are in the land at the point in time where this text is being written. And I show, if you look at my academia page, I show that Deuteronomy actually extends all the way to Joshua 5. So I'm going to read Joshua 4, verses 23 and 24. And I base the combining of the first 5 chapters, maybe even the first 8 chapters of Joshua with the book of Deuteronomy, specifically because of the internal chronology of both books. So Joshua states, "For Yahweh your God dried up the waters of the Jordan from before you until you were passed over. And Yahweh your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us, until they were gone over, that all the people of the earth might know the hand of Yahweh that is mighty, that you might fear Yahweh your God forever." So you find all these same ideas being repeated. Now here it just uses the first stitch where it says the hand of Yahweh your God, but it also has the concept of mighty. The other thing that I would like to point out, and this is from our previous sheet, If you go back to the one from the A and B sections of Jeremiah 32:21. In Exodus 7:4, when it talks about Yahweh bringing forth Israel out by their armies, it specifically describes what Yahweh did to Egypt as being great judgments. And here, the word is based on mishpat, so it is a judgment against Egypt. So when we read the book, the first 12 chapters of Exodus, we read about all the judgments against Egypt that really destroyed them, that weakened them as a nation. And then there was this huge population collapse as Israel, and it wasn't just Israel, it was a lot of other foreigners that joined with Israel as they fled Egypt because they all wanted liberty. They wanted a better life. And that is, now I will say that is attested archaeologically when we look at the beginning of the New Kingdom period, prior to the New Kingdom period, right at the end of the Egyptian Second Intermediate period. You do find a huge population collapse and a lot of evidence for the plagues that are recorded in the first 12 chapters of Exodus. So what I want to show this morning was just this ongoing cogency of the text that is very consistent. There isn't contradiction. And just because there are a formal phrase or phraseology is beginning to be used as Israel comes into a formal writing period where it becomes an administration of a state, whether it is a small tribal state or a larger administrative state, that does not compromise the text. I don't think we need to be afraid of that. I think it just shows a history that is unfolding. If Moses, my nose is itching, had been educated in Pharaoh's, I believe it's called the Kaf, in Pharaoh's scribal schools and in Pharaoh's household, Moses would have been very, very well versed in how history writing was supposed to take place. And if the scribes working under him were not familiar, which I think they were, he certainly could have trained them, especially during 40 years of wilderness, a lot of time to train people how to write history. So I hope this gives you some solid evidence to hold on to. We are going to continue this discussion on episode 29, and we are going to begin to get into the prophets and see how these phrases and how prophets use scholarship in their quoting of the written Torah and previous prophets. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm glad to have you with me this morning, and I hope you have a fabulous and wonderful day. Thank you so very much for your time. See you next time.